polite drive for secession in radio-free Vermont. Peculiar, impractical and illegal though it may be, secession has its enthusiasts in a surprising number of states. Just last year, Texas Republicans voted on whether to include an endorsement of independence in their party platform. They didn't. This year, there have already been 3 attempts in California at a Calexit, though it's probably more viable as a Scrabble word than a political objective. Even New York City has made noises about seceding from time to time, though generally from its parent state and not the country at large. In 1969, Norman Mailer and Jimmy Breslin ran a political campaign largely devoted to the idea of Gotham's sovereignty, with the mulish insistence that the city get custody of the name New York. The rest of the state would be re-christened Buffalo. Like Mailer and Breslin, Vern Barkley, the old-school radio host and septuagenarian hero of Bill McKibben's Radio Free Vermont, doesn't truly believe he'll have any success with the secessionist movement he leads. He's an accidental renegade, a guy who fell backward into the revolution business while reporting his final story. His plan that day, as he explains to his listeners, was simple: to go rogue while covering the opening of a Walmart in St. Albans, VT. Not his type of assignment, the new corporate overlords of his radio station insisted, as he was cheerfully interviewing fake salespeople he'd planted throughout the store, men and women who were all too happy to enumerate Walmart's crimes against the environment, humanity and the integrity of household appliances. A jet of raw sewage spilled onto the facility's pristine floor. Walmart's management assumed Barkley was responsible for the stunt. He wasn't. It was the handiwork of a 19-year-old hacker and social activist named Perry, a kid Barkley had never met before. It didn't matter, he and Perry were now in the soup together. The two fled, took refuge in an old farmhouse and began a series of untraceable podcasts. Underground, underfoot and underpowered became its tagline, with every broadcast sponsored by a different beer. Vermont has almost as many microbreweries as house cats. That was that. A movement for Vermont's independence was born. In his public appearances, McKibben, a Vermonter and one of the best-known environmentalists of our age, can be an extremely droll and appealing Cassandra. But there's little in his many previous books to suggest he can pull off a novel-length satire. He's a serious man. To Bill Maher, who complained that McKibben wasn't giving him enough hopeful news, the author said, "This is your fault. You asked someone on whose most famous book was called The End of Nature, okay, yet Radio Free Vermont is a charming bit of artisanal resistance lit. It's a bit rough, with the occasional nailhead poking up too high. Perry's upspeak? It gets to be, a bit much. But what's surprising is how well crafted the book is overall, how unhokey its folksiness feels, and how true its observations ring. The finest running joke in Radio Free Vermont, not least for being so plausible, is that Barkley and his supporters are a supremely pleasant group of separatists. When he disrupts the canned music at Starbucks to point out that Vermont has plenty of locally owned coffee shops, he signs off with, "Remember, small is kind of nice." When his pal Sylvia, the woman who provides him shelter in her farmhouse, hijacks a Coors truck, who needs big beer in the state with Hill Farms Ted and Hetty Topper, she hands the driver a picnic lunch and apologizes for including only one Long Trail coffee stout. "We're serious about DUI in this state," she says, "but I think you'll find it filling. Lest you think this is just the latest Blue State-flavored ice cream from Ben and Jerry's, remember, Vermonters love their guns." The ability to shoot them, while skiing, figures prominently in the plot. Barkley is a former coach of high school biathletes. One of his former students, a woman named Trance, won a gold medal in the Olympics, was a sharpshooter in Iraq and ultimately becomes a heroine of the Vermont independence movement. Radio Free Vermont is more than a fable of resistance, as its subtitle says. It's a love letter to the modest, treed-in landscape of Vermont, which Barkley wouldn't trade for all the grandeur of Montana. It's a dirge for the intense cold, which Barkley sorely misses. Why is the world now brown in January, rather than white? It made him feel old, McKibben writes, as if he'd outlived the very climate of his life. It is an elegy for a slower, saner Vermont. The world's rush was doing it in, and dependable Yankee virtues, like neighborliness and self-reliance and financial prudence. The book also helps contextualize Bernie Sanders's anti-establishment crankiness. Barkley likes to remind his listeners that Vermont was once its own republic. Throughout the story, the secessionist movement gains in popularity. Bumper stickers start appearing on cars: Barkley for governor, Barkley for prime minister. Post offices start flying a new Free Vermont flag designed by Barkley's 96-year-old mother. The New York Times runs a feature story under the headline, "In Quaint Green Mountain Hamlets, a Push for Independence." Gotta admit that's pretty good. Barkley increasingly devotes his podcasts to questions of feasibility were a divorce to take place. Can Vermonters defend themselves with guns? How would its citizens collect on their Social Security? McKibben never suggests he truly believes secession is the solution in times of political turmoil. If anything, it's the opposite. Barkley eventually worries he's asking people to do something a little dangerous and more than a little weird. What he's proposing is merely a thought experiment, daring the reader to ponder the virtues of smallness in an age of military and corporate gigantism. In his acknowledgments, he notes that Vermont has already had one minor league attempt at a secession movement, about a decade ago, that failed, spectacularly. But if non-Vermonters need refuge in the months or years ahead, he adds, you're all welcome to come to the Green Mountain State. We'll teach you to drive dirt roads in mud season.